The most dangerous mistake a young leader can make is assuming age has erased what experience remembers. The words would not be spoken until much later, but on that warm afternoon at Camp Pendleton, they might as well have been written across the sky. Heat shimmered above the asphalt. A steady Pacific breeze rattled the flags near the training grounds. Cadet Ethan Brooks strode across the restricted zone with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously questioned in his life. At 22 years old, with perfect posture and a spotless uniform, he believed discipline solved every problem. Around him, a group of fellow cadets followed closely, eager to mirror his certainty. That was when he noticed the old man. He stood near the edge of the training area beside a weathered chain-link fence, hands resting loosely at his sides. His faded olive jacket looked older than some of the buildings on base. His silver hair moved gently in the wind. He appeared completely ordinary, completely harmless, and completely out of place. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The old man was not wearing a visitor badge. He was not escorted. He did not seem concerned about being approached. "Sir," Ethan called sharply, closing the distance. "This is a restricted area." The old man slowly turned. His pale blue eyes settled on the young cadet. Calm, steady, untroubled. "I know where I am," he replied. His voice carried the rough texture of age, but none of its weakness. Ethan interpreted the answer as defiance. Several cadets exchanged amused glances. One quietly chuckled. Another shook his head. To them, the man looked like a confused retiree who had wandered into the wrong place. "Identification," Ethan demanded. The old man did not move. He simply watched the cadet with an expression that was impossible to read. Not fear, not annoyance. Something deeper, something older. The silence stretched. Irritation crept into Ethan's voice. Following protocol during the exercise, he raised a blue training pistol and held it near the veteran's head to reinforce the command. The gesture drew nervous laughter from the others. It was supposed to establish authority. It was supposed to end the conversation. Yet something unexpected happened. The old man did not flinch, not even slightly. The breeze continued to tug at his jacket. His breathing never changed. His gaze never shifted. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Ethan's face. Most people reacted when confronted. They stepped back. They looked away. They became nervous. This man did none of those things. He simply stood there, as unmoved as a stone monument. Around them, the sounds of the base seemed strangely distant. The hum of vehicles, the faint call of seabirds overhead, the metallic clink of equipment being moved somewhere beyond the training field. The old man looked at the young cadet and finally spoke. "Put that thing down, son." The words were quiet. There was no anger behind them, no threat, no challenge. Somehow that made them even harder to ignore. A few cadets shifted uneasily. Ethan felt his confidence slipping but refused to show it. He tightened his jaw. The old man's eyes remained fixed on him, calm, patient, as if he had stood through far more intimidating moments than this. As if this entire encounter belonged to a chapter of life he had finished many decades ago. And none of the young men surrounding him had any idea who they were really talking to. The uneasy silence lingered for several seconds after the old man spoke. Ethan Brooks hated silence. Silence meant uncertainty, and uncertainty had no place in the version of leadership he believed in. He lowered the training pistol only an inch, enough to signal that he had heard the comment, but not enough to surrender authority. Around him, the other cadets watched carefully, waiting to see how their unofficial leader would respond. The old man remained exactly where he was. His weathered jacket shifted gently in the ocean breeze. His expression never changed. Ethan folded his shoulders back and stepped closer. "You still have not explained why you are here," he said. "Restricted areas are not open to the public." The old man nodded slightly, as though acknowledging a point in a conversation that only he could hear. "Maybe," he replied, "but I was invited." A few cadets laughed. One of them, a tall blonde cadet named Ryan Mercer, shook his head. "Invited by who?" he asked. "The commandant." More laughter followed. The old man did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted beyond the training field toward the distant hills overlooking the base. For a brief moment, he seemed less interested in the young men surrounding him than in memories none of them could see. "Someone who remembers," he finally said. Ethan felt irritation rising again. The answer sounded vague, deliberately vague. It felt like the kind of response people gave when they wanted attention but lacked facts. That is not how this works, Ethan said sharply. If you belong here, prove it. The veteran looked back at him. You think proof lives on paper? The question landed harder than Ethan expected. He had no immediate response. Before he could answer, Ryan stepped around him and grinned. I think proof lives in reality. He pointed toward the old man. And reality says you are an 80-year-old civilian standing in the wrong place. Several cadets nodded. The veteran simply listened. The reaction almost seemed to disappoint them. They wanted frustration. They wanted excuses. Instead, they got patience. Ethan noticed something strange. The old man was studying each face carefully. Not with fear. Not with resentment. More like recognition. As if he had met versions of them many times before. Young men full of confidence. Young men convinced the world began with their generation. A gust of wind swept across the training grounds. Dust rolled along the pavement. The American flag snapped sharply overhead. The veteran slowly shifted his stance. As he did, the collar of his jacket moved aside for just a second. Ryan noticed it first. Hold on. His voice changed. What is that? He stepped closer and pointed toward the area just behind the old man's right ear. Ethan followed his gaze. There, partially hidden beneath silver hair, was a long pale scar. It stretched downward toward the neck, old and faded but impossible to miss once seen. Ryan smirked. That looks serious. Another cadet laughed. Maybe he got into a fight at a retirement home. The group chuckled. The veteran raised one hand and touched the scar lightly with 2 fingers. For the first time since the encounter began, something shifted in his eyes. Not anger. Not sadness. Something far deeper. Something distant. The sounds of the bass seemed to fade around him. The wind. The laughter. The voices. For a moment he appeared to be looking far beyond Camp Pendleton. Far beyond California itself. Toward a place and a time none of the cadets could imagine. His fingers rested against the faded scar, and the years seemed to fold inward like pages closing on a forgotten book. The cadets saw only an old man standing beneath the California sun. Jack Donovan saw rain. Endless rain. Not the gentle coastal breeze of Camp Pendleton, but warm tropical rain falling through thick jungle canopy thousands of miles away and decades in the past. The smell of salt air disappeared, replaced by damp earth, wet leaves, and the heavy scent of a world untouched by time. He was no longer an old man. He was a young Marine moving silently through dense terrain with 4 others who trusted him with their lives. They had been deep in unfamiliar territory for days. Sleep came in minutes, not hours. Every sound mattered. Every shadow carried meaning. The mission itself had long faded from official records, but some memories never asked permission before returning. Jack remembered a young corporal walking beside him, barely 19 years old, talking about a girl back home and a fishing boat his father owned on the Gulf Coast. He remembered another Marine who carried photographs in a waterproof pouch and looked at them every night before sunrise. He remembered faces more than names now, faces frozen in time while his own reflection had grown old. The scar behind his ear had come during those days. Not from glory, not from some dramatic story told in recruiting posters. It had come from a single unpredictable moment that reminded everyone how fragile plans could be. A reminder that experience was not measured by victories, but by survival. He remembered reaching up and feeling warmth against his skin. He remembered another Marine grabbing his shoulder and refusing to leave him behind. Most of all, he remembered continuing forward because the men beside him depended on it. The memory shifted again. Rain hammered broad jungle leaves. Boots moved carefully through mud. A distant voice whispered over a radio. Then came the moment he never forgot. A frightened young Marine had frozen under pressure, overwhelmed by uncertainty and fear. No one blamed him. Fear was part of being human. Jack had placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and spoken calmly until the panic passed. Years later, he could not remember the exact words, but he remembered the lesson. Confidence was loud. Courage was quiet. The jungle faded. The rain vanished. The sounds of Camp Pendleton slowly returned. Wind moved across the training field. A helicopter hummed somewhere in the distance. Laughter echoed near another group of cadets. Jack lowered his hand from the scar. His eyes focused once more on the young men standing before him. Ryan Mercer was still smirking. Ethan Brooks still wore the expression of someone determined to prove a point. Neither of them knew they had just mocked a reminder carried across more than 60 years. Neither of them understood why the old man standing before them seemed untouched by pressure. Jack looked at them without anger, without judgment, simply with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime watching young men learn difficult lessons. Then he offered a faint smile. It was small enough to miss if someone blinked, but it was there, and for reasons Ethan could not explain, that smile unsettled him far more than any argument ever could. The smile disappeared as quietly as it had arrived, leaving behind the same unreadable calm that had frustrated Ethan from the beginning. The young cadet folded his arms across his chest and looked toward the others, searching for support. He found plenty. Ryan Mercer was still grinning. Two more cadets stood nearby, exchanging amused looks. To them, the encounter remained simple. An old man had wandered somewhere he should not be. The rest was merely entertainment. Ethan took a slow breath. "Last chance," he said. "Tell us exactly who invited you." Jack Donovan glanced toward the parade grounds beyond the training area. Preparations were underway for an event scheduled later that afternoon. Trucks moved equipment. Marines crossed open pavement carrying supplies. The entire base seemed busy except for the small circle of tension surrounding him. "Someone who kept his word," Jack answered. Ryan laughed loudly. "That does not even mean anything." A few of the cadets joined him. Their confidence returned now that the momentary discomfort had passed. Ethan felt it too. Whatever strange feeling the old man created, there was still no proof that he belonged here. No identification, no credentials, no explanation. Just vague answers and an unsettling amount of composure. "Search his pockets," Ryan suggested casually. "Maybe we will finally get a real answer." Ethan hesitated. The suggestion crossed a line, but only slightly. Before he could decide, Ryan stepped forward on his own. "Do not worry, Grandpa," he said with a smirk. "We are just helping solve the mystery." Jack made no effort to stop him. That surprised everyone. Ryan carefully reached toward the old jacket and checked one of the outer pockets. He expected a wallet, maybe a visitor pass. Instead, his fingers found a folded piece of paper. He pulled it out triumphantly. Finally, the cadets gathered closer. Ryan unfolded the paper. His smile immediately faded. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Ryan turned the paper over. It was old, much older than expected. The edges were worn soft with age. The ink had faded in places. At first glance, it appeared insignificant. A simple photograph, black and white, no larger than a postcard. Ethan took it from him. 5 young Marines stood shoulder to shoulder in the picture. Mud stained their uniforms. Their expressions were tired but proud. Behind them stretched dense jungle. The image looked ancient. "That is it?" one cadet asked. "A photograph?" Ryan shrugged. "Looks like something from a museum." Ethan studied the faces. One of them seemed familiar, not because he recognized the young Marine, but because the eyes looked strangely similar to the old man standing beside him. Decades separated the faces, yet the resemblance remained. Jack watched silently. The wind tugged at the corner of the photograph. For a brief second, his gaze lingered on the 5 young Marines captured in time. Something changed in his expression. Not sadness, not nostalgia, respect. The kind earned through shared hardship and carried for a lifetime. Then another voice entered the conversation. "Where did you get that?" The question came from behind them. Sharp, controlled. Every cadet turned. A Marine gunnery sergeant had stopped 20 feet away. His name tape read Noah Hayes. He was carrying a clipboard when he arrived, but now it hung forgotten at his side. His eyes were locked on the photograph. And for the first time that afternoon, someone on the base looked genuinely alarmed. The reaction caught everyone off guard. Gunnery Sergeant Noah Hayes was not a man easily surprised. Years of service had carved patience into his face and discipline into every movement. Yet the moment he saw the photograph, the color seemed to drain from his expression. Ethan noticed it immediately. Ryan noticed it too. The laughter that had filled the air only seconds earlier faded into uneasy silence. Noah stepped closer. His eyes never left the photograph. "Let me see that." The request was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that made people obey without thinking. Ethan handed over the worn image. Noah studied it carefully. The afternoon breeze rustled the corners of the photograph as his gaze moved from one Marine to the next. Then it stopped on the young man standing near the center, a younger version of Jack Donovan. Noah looked up at the veteran. "Sir," he said quietly, "I did not realize you were already here." The change in tone was impossible to miss. Ryan frowned. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The old man simply nodded. Got here a little early. Noah glanced back at the photograph. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he seemed lost in thought. Then he looked toward the cadets. Do any of you know what this is? No one answered. Ryan shrugged. An old picture. Noah slowly shook his head. No, it is not. His finger touched one corner of the photograph. There, nearly hidden by age and fading ink, was a small handwritten note. Ethan leaned closer. The words were difficult to read. Tom had worn them almost completely away. Almost. Noah read them without hesitation. Recon Team Echo. Summer of 1968. The training field suddenly felt much quieter. Ethan recognized the date immediately. Even cadets knew enough military history to understand what that period represented. Noah carefully handed the photograph back to Jack. The respect in the gesture was unmistakable. I have heard stories about this picture, he said. Ryan laughed nervously. Stories about a photograph. Noah turned toward him. There was no humor in his eyes. Not about the photograph. About the men in it. The answer settled heavily over the group. Ethan watched the veteran. Jack remained calm, almost uncomfortable with the attention, as though the conversation had drifted toward something he never wanted discussed. Noah seemed to notice the same thing. He lowered his voice. Sir, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Jack offered a small shrug. They are young. That is not an excuse. Noah looked back at the cadets. His gaze lingered on Ethan, then on Ryan. Neither man said a word. The gunnery sergeant reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Ethan felt a strange sense of anticipation. What are you doing? Ryan asked. Noah did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on Jack for a moment before speaking. Making a call. To who? Ethan asked. Noah's expression hardened. Someone who needs to know he is here. The words hung in the warm afternoon air. Then Noah turned away from the group and walked several yards toward the edge of the training grounds. He dialed a number from memory. The line connected almost immediately. Ethan could not hear the voice on the other end. He only heard Noah's response. The gunnery sergeant stood perfectly still and said 7 simple words. Sir, Donovan is here at Pendleton. Then he stopped talking, because whatever came through the phone next caused the seasoned Marine to straighten instantly and stare toward the horizon with an expression Ethan Brooks would never forget. Noah Hayes remained motionless with the phone pressed against his ear. The conversation on the other end lasted only a few seconds, yet something about it changed the entire atmosphere around him. Ethan Brooks could see it in the way the gunnery sergeant stood. The relaxed posture was gone. The casual confidence of a routine afternoon had vanished. In its place stood the rigid focus of a Marine receiving information that mattered. Noah listened carefully, answered with a single quiet, "Yes, sir," and ended the call. For several moments, he simply stared across the training grounds. The breeze continued to sweep in from the Pacific. Vehicles moved in the distance. Marines carried equipment toward the parade area. Life on the base continued exactly as before, yet somehow everything felt different. Ethan stepped forward. Gunny. Noah slowly turned back toward the group. His expression revealed nothing. Resume your training schedule, he said. Ryan frowned. That is it. Noah ignored the question and walked directly toward Jack Donovan. The old veteran was standing exactly where he had been from the beginning, hands resting comfortably at his sides. There was no curiosity in his face, no anxiety. It was almost as if he already knew how the phone call had gone. Sir, Noah said quietly. They are on their way. Jack sighed softly, not annoyed, not surprised, more like a man hearing confirmation of something unavoidable. That was not necessary. Noah almost smiled. With respect, sir, it absolutely was. Ethan exchanged a confused glance with Ryan. Neither of them understood what was happening anymore. A simple encounter had somehow transformed into something far larger. Who is coming? Ryan finally asked. Noah looked at him. You should focus on your responsibilities, cadet. The answer only made things worse. Curiosity spread through the group. Several additional Marines nearby had begun noticing the unusual scene. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. A few people glanced toward Jack before continuing on their way. The veteran seemed completely unaffected by the growing attention. Ethan studied him carefully. The old jacket, the weathered face, the calm blue eyes. Nothing about him matched the reaction he was receiving. That contradiction bothered him more than anything else. Then a radio crackled somewhere behind them. Another answered. Moments later, a utility vehicle crossed the far side of the training field at an unusually high speed. No one noticed it immediately. So did several Marines nearby. A subtle ripple of awareness began spreading across the base. Ethan could not explain it, but experienced personnel suddenly seemed alert. Not alarmed. Alert. As if an important visitor had arrived without warning. Ryan stepped closer to Ethan. "Do you know what is going on?" Ethan shook his head. For the first time all afternoon, he truly did not know. And that realization unsettled him. Jack Donovan watched the horizon. The sunlight reflected softly from the windows of distant buildings. Somewhere beyond them, preparations for the afternoon ceremony continued. The veteran's expression softened slightly. Not because he was enjoying the attention. Quite the opposite. He looked like a man remembering people who were no longer there to witness it. Then Noah's phone vibrated again. He checked the screen and immediately straightened. His eyes lifted toward the southern edge of the base. A faint sound rolled across the air. Deep. Rhythmic. Familiar. Rotor blades. Several cadets turned instinctively toward the noise. The sound grew stronger with every passing second. Ethan felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. He looked at Noah. The gunnery sergeant was already standing at attention. And in that moment, before anyone had seen who was arriving, Ethan Brooks realized the old man standing beside the fence was someone far more important than he had ever imagined. The sound grew steadily louder until conversations across the training grounds began to fade on their own. Marines stopped what they were doing and looked toward the southern edge of the base. A helicopter appeared beyond the distant buildings, moving low across the California sky. Sunlight flashed across its windshield. The rhythmic pulse of the rotor wash rolled over the pavement like approaching thunder. Ethan Brooks stared upward in disbelief. Aircraft arrived at Camp Pendleton every day. Yet nothing about the reaction around him felt ordinary. Staff members who had been walking moments earlier were now standing still. Several senior non-commissioned officers had emerged from nearby facilities. A captain crossing the parade field suddenly changed direction and moved toward the landing area at a near jog. Ryan Mercer swallowed hard. "Who was on that helicopter?" he asked. No one answered. Noah Hayes remained standing at attention. His eyes never left the aircraft. The helicopter descended toward a secured section of open ground several hundred yards away. Dust spiraled into the air. Vehicles stopped moving. Radios crackled with brief bursts of communication. The entire base seemed to shift around a single invisible point. Jack Donovan watched quietly. There was no excitement in his expression. No pride. If anything, he looked mildly uncomfortable, as though he would have preferred to remain unnoticed. Ethan could not understand it. Nothing about the old Marine fit the reaction unfolding around him. The helicopter settled onto the ground. Moments later, figures emerged. Too distant to identify at first. Yet whatever Noah saw caused his posture to become even straighter. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Several Marines nearby immediately moved into position. Not ceremonial. Respectful. Deliberate. A black government vehicle appeared less than a minute later, crossing the base with surprising speed. Ryan looked at Ethan. This cannot be about him. Ethan wanted to agree. He wanted to dismiss the thought entirely. But the evidence in front of him made that impossible. Every road seemed to lead back to the quiet veteran standing beside the fence. More personnel began arriving. A major, then a lieutenant colonel. None of them approached Jack directly. Instead, they gathered nearby, speaking in low voices while frequently glancing in his direction. The atmosphere felt strangely electric. Not fear. Anticipation. Ethan had experienced inspections, ceremonies, high-profile visits. This felt different. Then Noah's phone vibrated once more. He checked the message and exhaled slowly. "They are here," he said. The words barely rose above a whisper. Yet everyone nearby heard them. Ethan followed Noah's gaze toward the approaching vehicles. One stopped. Then another. Doors opened. Senior officers stepped out and immediately began moving toward the training grounds. No hesitation. No delay. Purpose guided every step. Ryan's confidence finally cracked. Who exactly is he? Noah looked at him for several seconds before answering. That is the question you should have asked from the beginning. The response landed like a weight. Silence followed. Even the wind seemed quieter. Jack Donovan remained exactly where he had stood all afternoon. Calm, patient, unmoved by the attention surrounding him. The approaching officers drew closer with every passing second. Ethan watched their faces. None of them looked confused. None of them looked curious. They looked determined. And suddenly a realization struck him with unsettling force. Whatever happened next was not going to reveal why Jack Donovan was important. It was going to reveal just how badly they had underestimated him. The approaching officers crossed the training grounds with a sense of purpose that silenced every remaining conversation. Lieutenant colonels, and senior enlisted leaders moved into position without being told. Ethan Brooks had never seen anything like it. No ceremony had been announced. No inspection had been scheduled. Yet experienced Marines from every direction seemed to understand that something important was happening. Then the crowd parted. A tall figure stepped forward from the group of arriving officers. His silver hair caught the afternoon sunlight. 4 stars rested on his shoulders. Lieutenant General Richard Kane. The sight alone was enough to make the cadets snap upright. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Ryan Mercer looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. The general did not acknowledge the cadets. He did not acknowledge the gathered officers. He did not even glance at the growing crowd surrounding the training area. His attention remained fixed on one person, Jack Donovan. The distance between them closed slowly. The wind moved across the parade grounds. Flags snapped overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter engine powered down. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Ethan watched the general approach the old Marine with an expression he had never seen on a senior officer before. It was not authority. It was respect. Genuine and unmistakable. Jack seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. "Richard," he said softly as the general stopped a few feet away. The use of a first name made several nearby officers blink in surprise. The general smiled. It was the smile of a man greeting someone he had admired for years. Then, without hesitation, Lieutenant General Richard Kane came to attention. Every sound seemed to disappear from the world. Ethan stared in disbelief. The general raised his hand in a perfect salute. Not rushed. Not symbolic. Precise. Respectful. Earned. The officers around him immediately followed. Then the senior enlisted Marines. One by one, the entire area transformed. Salutes appeared across the training field. Ryan's face turned pale. Ethan felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Jack slowly returned the salute. His movements were measured and humble. The general lowered his hand first. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. The Corps never forgot. Nobody missed the word. "Sir." A 4-star general had just addressed the quiet old veteran as "Sir." Ethan saw several cadets exchange stunned looks. Questions flooded their faces. Jack shook his head slightly. "You always make too much of these things." A few officers smiled. The general did not. Not this one. His gaze moved briefly toward the faded photograph Jack still carried. "Not after what your team did." The crowd remained silent. No detailed explanation was necessary. The reaction itself explained everything. This was not an ordinary veteran. This was not a forgotten retiree. This was someone whose name still carried weight decades later among people who understood exactly what it meant. Ethan remembered every assumption he had made that afternoon. Every dismissive thought. Every moment of certainty. They now felt painfully small. The old Marine had never demanded respect. Never defended himself. Never revealed who he was. He had simply stood there while others revealed who they were. And in that moment, surrounded by officers, Marines, and stunned cadets, the truth finally became impossible to ignore. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than any command ever could. Ethan Brooks stood frozen, staring at the old Marine he had spent the entire afternoon misjudging. Around him, officers and senior Marines remained respectfully still. The weight of what had happened settled over the training grounds like a shadow. Lieutenant General Richard Kane looked toward the gathered cadets. His expression was calm, but there was disappointment in his eyes. Not anger. Disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. He turned back to Jack Donovan. "Most of them know the stories," the general said quietly. "Very few ever believed they were real." Jack shook his head. "Stories grow with age." A faint smile touched the general's face. "Not these." He looked toward the faded photograph once more. 5 Marines went into that jungle. 5 Marines came home. That alone became legend. The surrounding officers nodded silently. Ethan noticed something important. Nobody talked about medals. Nobody talked about awards. Nobody listed accomplishments. The respect came from something deeper. Character. Service. Sacrifice. Things that could not be displayed on a wall. Ryan Mercer stared at the ground. The confidence that had fueled him earlier was gone. "Sir," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at him. "Yes." Ryan swallowed hard. "I am sorry." The words hung in the air. Simple. Honest. Real. Ethan stepped forward next. "So am I." Jack studied both young men for a moment. Then he nodded. "Good." That was all. No lecture. No humiliation. No attempt to make them feel worse than they already did. The response surprised them more than anything else. The general noticed their confusion. "That," he said, "is why men still speak his name with respect." Ethan looked at Jack. The veteran had every reason to embarrass them, every reason to expose their mistakes. Yet he refused. The realization struck harder than any criticism could have. Strength was not proving people wrong. Strength was having no need to. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent toward the Pacific. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. The ceremony preparations continued in the distance, but the atmosphere felt different now. Calmer. More thoughtful. Jack carefully folded the old photograph and returned it to his pocket. His gaze drifted toward the horizon where ocean air met California sky. For a moment, he seemed far away again, remembering faces that existed only in memory. Friends who would forever remain young. The general stood beside him in respectful silence. No words were needed. Eventually, Jack glanced toward the cadets one last time. "You will all wear the uniform someday," he said. "Just remember that the people around you may have stories you cannot see." Ethan nodded. Ryan nodded. Every cadet listening did the same. The lesson would stay with them far longer than any training exercise. Jack turned and began walking toward the parade grounds. No dramatic farewell. No final reveal. Just a quiet old Marine disappearing into the evening light. The crowd slowly parted to let him pass. Not because he demanded it, because he had earned it. Ethan watched him go until he vanished from sight. Only then did he truly understand something that no classroom had ever taught him. Respect is not given because someone asks for it. It is given because a life has already proven it deserves to be remembered. Some men never need to explain who they are. Their actions did that long ago.